Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into a place where velvet curtains fall heavy and incense curls like lazy smoke through the air. We are in the hidden bedrooms of Imperial China, where everything looks serene on the surface. Yet every whisper, every shift of silk carries the weight of an empire. You might imagine it's glamorous, but honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a single night here between the endless rules. The watching eyes, and the pressure to behave like your private life is a national treasure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave me a comment with your local time and place. Love knowing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch your imagination past the palace walls, stepping through corridors that smell faintly of sandalwood, candles dripping into bronze bowls. The bedroom itself isn't just a room, it is a stage, where intimacy is never private, not really. The emperor's chamber is guarded, curated, even decorated with an eye for ritual rather than romance. Rich draperies embroidered with dragons shimmer in the lamplight, but they're less about comfort and more about declaring power. It's like trying to have a Netflix and chill night under a giant neon sign that says, "This is for politics." The bed, a massive wooden platform carved with phoenixes, feels almost alive with its creaks. Imagine lying there, knowing that centuries of history sit heavy in the mattress. And yes, no memory foam. Just stiff brocade, lumpy cushions, and the occasional mosquito humming near your ear. Not exactly the honeymoon suite at a luxury resort. In this world, intimacy is rarely about two people. It's about lineage, reputation, divine order. You don't just hold someone's hand, you hold the fate of succession, the hopes of entire clans, sometimes the survival of a dynasty. That kind of pressure makes date night jitters sound like child's play. Even the air feels staged. The room is perfumed, sometimes with lotus oil, sometimes with blends of herbs meant to balance the body's energy. The logic, if harmony, flows through the body, then the emperor's vigor will be strong, and the empire too. Was it true? Well, historians still argue whether those perfumed rituals were genuinely effective or simply wishful thinking dressed up in silk. Either way, imagine trying to relax while someone insists you sniff a bowl of boiling mugwort leaves for good luck. Not quite the scented candle you were hoping for. As you walk further into this imagined chamber, the silence is deceptive. You know outside these walls, the court is alive with gossip. Servants carry trays, eunuchs shuffle past with practiced quiet. And even though the door is closed, the room is never truly private. Somewhere, someone is already counting the minutes, taking notes, making sure everything that should happen does happen. Talk about performance anxiety. And here you are, in the middle of it all, hearing the hush of silk against the wooden floor, feeling the cold draft that sneaks in from a latticed window. Shadows play across the walls, lantern light trembling as if it knows too much. You can almost hear the emperor's steady breath, the rustle of fabric, the way the night seems endless, stretching out until dawn with all its heavy expectations. If you close your eyes, you sense the tension. It's the kind of tension that doesn't just live in body set, lives in politics, in families, in whispered rumors. The chamber, though small, feels crowded with history. You feel it pressing in from the lacquered walls, from the painted screens that depict gardens of immortality, as if reminding you, intimacy here is never just about love. It's about eternity, or at least the attempt to fake it. And the strangest part, in all this grandeur, you find yourself missing something as simple as privacy. Imagine trying to drift off to sleep here, knowing that behind a carved screen someone is listening, or that tomorrow morning your performance might just be the subject of palace debate. Suddenly, Netflix buffering doesn't seem so bad, so you sit with that unease, letting it settle like dust in the lamplight as the night deepens around you and the chamber waits, heavy with silence, heavy with expectation, heavy with the strange intimacy of empire. You let your breath slow, as if you're walking deeper into a palace where silence itself has been trained like a guard dog. The air smells faintly of sandalwood, lacquered wood panels holding on to centuries of incense smoke. And somewhere, yes, the faint rustle of silk slippers moving just out of sight. You're no longer in the emperor's chamber. No, tonight you're entering the world of those who waited, plotted, and occasionally knitted when nobody was looking. The consorts, the imperial harem, was less like a romantic novel and more like a very competitive sorority, except nobody got to graduate. Here, hundreds of women lived in a gilded maze of courtyards and halls, each with their own attendants, their own wardrobes, and let's be honest, their own grudges. Imagine trying to sleep at night when the woman next door is rehearsing how she impressed the emperor with a new poem, while the one across the hall is bribing the kitchen for sweeter pears. Peaceful, hardly by day, the place buzzed with the tiniest dramas, who received a glance during the morning walk, who got a new hairpin with jade inlay. A sideways smile could spark rumors, and a misplaced scarf could be interpreted as a sign of divine favor or just bad housekeeping. Servants carried whispers as efficiently as they carried tea trays, and those whispers often mattered more than official decrees. After all, in the palace, stories traveled faster than couriers. You might picture these consorts as endlessly pampered, reclining on cushions, attended by maids fanning them gently. And yes, that happened, but so did endless rules. Every robe, every gesture, even the way you bowed your head, was regulated. A slip of the wrong sleeve could mean punishment. And of course, the calendar ruled all. Nights were scheduled, almost bureaucratically. The emperor did not simply wander where desire pulled him. There was an official roster. You could be on duty like a shift worker at a factory. Historians still debate whether this scheduling kept order or just created a lot of anxious insomniacs rehearsing their smiles. Yet within this rigid structure, women found ways to carve their own spaces of influence. Some read poetry, some dabbled in calligraphy, and others became experts in subtle persuasion. A carefully placed compliment, a gesture of solidarity, these tiny moves created alliances. You never knew when the woman who today helped adjust your elaborate hairpiece might tomorrow whisper a kind word about you to the emperor. Of course, she might also mention you snore, so best to be polite. One vivid scene. Picture a courtyard at dusk. The stone is cooling after the day's heat. Lanterns flicker, casting gold light on red lacquer doors. A small group of consorts gather, not for drama, but for embroidery. Needles flashing in the lamplight, laughter weaving through the air, the scent of jasmine tea nearby. For a moment, they are not rivals, not political pieces, but women trading stories about their families, their childhoods, the kind of everyday chatter that never makes it into the official records. It's a reminder, behind the silks and the hierarchy, they were still people trying to make a strange life livable, and yet beneath that warmthly tension, a child could change everything. Bearing a son meant security, perhaps power. Failing to do so meant fading into the background. Some prayed to gods, some relied on strange remedies, and some simply hoped the emperor remembered their name. Historians note recipes in old medical texts involving everything from rare mushrooms to ground pearls meant to improve fertility. Were they effective? Well, considering the palace ended up with more heirs than it knew what to do with, perhaps we shouldn't laugh too quickly. Still, humor clings even here. Imagine the emperor sneezing during a visit. Every concubine in the room probably wondered if she'd somehow offended heaven, or the scramble when a favored dish was served. If the emperor liked it, suddenly everyone wanted their kitchens to master it. Fashion trends. Let's just say if the emperor admired a certain hairstyle, the next morning half the harem looked like mirror images. Forget Paris court fashion was dictated by one man's whims and a very captive audience. What strikes you most, though, is the contradiction. These women lived surrounded by beauty-painted screens, carved furniture, silks from the far corners of the empire, and yet freedom was almost non-existent. They could influence emperors, shape dynasties even, but they could not walk beyond those walls without permission. Their world was vast in luxury, yet narrow in scope, like being handed the world's finest quilt, but never allowed to step outside the bedroom it warms. Some of their rivalries turned into legends, tales of jealous plots, secret poisons, or clever tricks were retold for centuries, often exaggerated for drama. But alongside the scandals, there were also friendships, quiet bonds forged in the shared reality of waiting. After all, it's hard not to grow close when you share the same anxieties, the same restricted view of the moon through lattice windows. And so, as you imagine drifting through these corridors, you hear not shouting, but whispers, a laugh muffled behind a fan, a secret traded under the shade of a plum tree, a sigh, wondering if tomorrow might bring notice or simply another day. Of embroidery, it is, in its way, a lullaby of silken shadows. So let yourself breathe deeply. The rivalries soften into murmurs. The gossip fades into the background hum of a palace at night. You realize the harem was not just about passion, or jealousy was also about survival, patience, and the strange art of making a life inside gilded walls. And as those walls blur into the edge of your dreams, the world of consorts settles around you like a quilt of quiet voices, carrying you gently forward. Breathe slowly. Let the candlelight flicker in your imagination, warming the carved dragons that coil along the beams above. You are moving closer now, past the hush of silk corridors, into the very heart of power. Not the throne room, not the audience hall, but the quieter chambers where politics put on softer shoes. This is where the emperor's privilege stretched not only over the empire, but into the most personal corners of life. It's tempting to imagine him as a lonely man at the top, sighing under a mountain of scrolls, wishing for nothing more than a good night's sleep. And sometimes, yes, that was true, but other times, his bedchamber was a second council chamber, where decisions about heirs, alliances, and even wars were influenced by whom he summoned under his embroidered canopy. Desire and duty were never separate. They were tangled threads in the same silk. Picture the ritual of selection. The emperor did not simply stroll about, pointing at whomever he fancied, though wouldn't that make for a very efficient soap opera? Instead, officials and eunuchs managed the roster, keeping track of who was eligible, when, and why. Every visit became a line in a ledger. There were rules about timing, about seasonal balance, about not favoring one person too much. In other words, even passion had paperwork. Historians still debate whether this bureaucratic approach ensured fairness, or just ensured that everyone had insomnia while waiting their turn. Now imagine the scene. A winter night, the palace walls thick with cold. The emperor, wrapped in a heavy robe embroidered with golden cranes, sits by a brazier. Outside, snow gathers on the roof tiles. A eunuch approaches, holding a list written in neat brushstrokes. The names are read softly, and a decision is made. A concubine is chosen, carried on a quilt so she cannot touch the ground ritual purity, preserved even in the shuffle of footsteps. She enters, heart racing, not just because of romance, but because this moment could alter her family's future. Yes, it sounds dramatic, but in truth, it was politics draped in perfume. To be favored meant influence, gifts, maybe even a son who might one day sit on the throne. To be overlooked meant fading into silk-draped obscurity. And so every encounter was watched not directly, of course, but through the ripples it left behind. Who smiled the next morning? Who received new jewels? Who dared to hum as she walked past others? Even the absence of news was, in its own way, news. The emperor himself. He lived in contradiction. His privilege allowed him to summon beauty at will, yet it also bound him to duty. Producing heirs was not optional. It was a matter of state security. Some emperors leaned into indulgence, letting nights stretch long with wine, music, and laughter. Others treated intimacy like a military campaign, efficient and scheduled, ensuring the dynasty would never run short of princes. One lesser-known truth: medical manuals of the court often gave the emperor strict instructions on pacing himself. Too much passion, they warned, could weaken his essence, shorten his life, and jeopardize his reign. Can you imagine the Son of Heaven himself, told firmly by a physician to take fewer late nights? A prescription for moderation, though, of course, not always followed. The chambers themselves mirrored this blend of indulgence and duty. Thick silk curtains, painted screens showing mountains and rivers, reminders of the empire waiting outside. The door, candles perfumed with rare oils filled the air with sweetness. Musicians might play softly in the background, creating an atmosphere that was equal parts romantic and ceremonial. Yet hovering nearby were attendants, eunuchs who ensured protocol was followed, ready to record and report. Nothing in this world was truly private. Humor lingers even here. Imagine the emperor sneezing during an official selection. Was it a sign from heaven to postpone, or perhaps too much incense? Or consider the concubine whose hairstyle collapsed mid-bow. For all the grandeur, life still found its little embarrassments. Behind the solemn rules were human beings, fumbling just as much as anyone does when trying to impress. And yet, privilege carried weight. An emperor's choice could raise a clan's fortunes or doom them to irrelevance. Families outside the palace waited anxiously for news. Had their daughter been noticed? Was her name whispered with favor? Letters never told the whole truth, but even a hint of imperial attention could send ripples across provinces. It is here you see how deeply personal life shaped the empire. A favored consort's brother might rise in rank. A neglected family might fall from grace. A child born on a winter night might, decades later, command armies. History often records decrees and battles, but beneath them were evenings like this, moments, behind closed curtains, that steered the course of dynasties. Breathe again, slowly. Imagine the hush of the chamber settling like a blanket. The emperor reclines, attendants withdraw, candles burn low. Outside, snow continues its patient descent. For all the noise of politics, for all the bureaucracy of rosters and schedules, here in the quiet lies the heart of the dynasty's future. A single choice in the softness of night could echo for generations, and as the silence deepens, you realize this privilege was both gift and burden. To be emperor was to carry the weight of millions and, yet in the end, he was still a man, listening to the wind against the window, wondering whether he chose wisely, both for himself and for the empire. The chamber fades, the snow softens, and the privilege dissolves into dream. The chamber deepens, and with it, the stories grow stranger. You are no longer simply drifting through silk corridors. You are now leaning closer to the quiet mutter of secrets, the kind scribbled in faded ink and passed down under the promise that no one outside the palace walls would ever know. These were not just gestures of love, they were techniques sworn to grant vitality, balance, sometimes even the illusion of eternity. Imagine the emperor, robe half loosened, peering at a scroll while pretending to understand diagrams that looked suspiciously like abstract doodles. He strokes his beard thoughtfully, though you suspect he is really wondering if the scribe got bored halfway through and just invented squiggly lines. Outside, a eunuch coughs, the sound of someone who knows exactly what's going on and is trying very hard not to laugh. Some of these methods were solemn, framed as medicine. Physicians whispered that a man could preserve his strength by holding back, or that aligning his breath with the rhythm of the seasons could harmonize the body with the heavens. You picture the emperor inhaling grandly, exhaling with theatrical gravity, while a concubine looks at him sideways, thinking, are we practicing medicine, or are we just trying not to fall asleep? Others carried a tinge of magic, rumors of powders mixed with pearls, of talismans slipped beneath pillows, of nights orchestrated according to omens traced in the stars. It is almost comforting to realize that even emperors, with armies and treasuries at their command, still place their faith in little rituals, as fragile as moth wings. They believed that desire, if disciplined correctly, might stretch their days longer, keep the wheel of fortune turning in their favor, and yet, beneath all the solemnity, you can't help but notice the comedy. A candle sputters at the worst possible moment, incense smoke creeps into the emperor's nose, and suddenly the Grand Master of heaven and earth is sneezing through his own ritual. If power depends on not breaking rhythm, you can bet rhythm broke constantly. History, for all its grandeur, was stitched together with small, ridiculous moments. What makes it even murkier is the way fact and story braided themselves into one. Later, scholars trying to trace the line between genuine medical advice and embroidered rumor have admitted, in quieter tones, that perhaps the difference never really mattered. Was the emperor truly guided by these secret instructions, or were the scrolls more like decorative suggestions of what people wanted him to believe? Even the experts, sifting through brittle pages centuries later, shrugged as if to say, maybe this happened, maybe it didn't. Who really knew what happened behind silk curtains? The uncertainty becomes part of the story, as though the debate itself is another kind of ritual. For the women in these rooms, the experience was layered differently. Their bodies were sometimes cast as vessels of balance, expected to restore the emperor's essence or protect his health. To please him was not just to gain favor. It was to fulfill a cosmic role scripted by others. Yet in quiet glances and subtle pauses, They may have resisted or reinterpreted these duties. After all, when intimacy is framed as medicine, someone has to carry the weight of being the cure. And cures, as you know, do not always work the way the physician claims. The night thickens, and you see it more clearly. A ruler hunched over parchment, the brushstrokes of forgotten sages guiding his hand, the shadows of concubines waiting, the empire itself holding its breath. The promise of these forbidden teachings was never really about pleasure alone. It was about outsmarting time, keeping decay at bay, proving that power could extend even into the private chamber. The irony is soft and steady. No matter the ritual, no one escaped the slow, patient march of years. But for that moment, the belief itself was soothing. To imagine that each gesture had meaning, that each breath could tilt the balance of heaven, that is its own kind of comfort. And as you settle deeper into this dim-lit world, the scrolls roll shut, the whispers quiet, and the only rhythm left is the steady rise and fall of your own chest, as if you, too, are part of a ritual meant to carry you softly into sleep, under the hush of the previous chamber, where scrolls curled shut and whispers dissolved into smoke. The story slides seamlessly into cloth and fragrance. You are still inside, still listening, but now your attention is caught by the shimmer of silk, folding like liquid over skin. It rustles softly, a sound almost too delicate to belong to politics, yet here it is, an empire's ambitions stitched into fabric. You notice how silk does not merely cover, it performs. The emperor shifts, and his robe sighs with him, gleaming, as though it has its own secret life. The concubines move like petals stirred by an invisible breeze, each step releasing the faintest whisper of fabric, the faintest suggestion that clothing is less about modesty and more about choreography. What use are words when silk can say so much by falling at just the right angle? And then there are the scents, weaving themselves through the room like invisible courtiers. A thread of sandalwood, a breath of jasmine, resin burned until the air thickens sweetly around your nose. The chamber becomes its own landscape. The silk is water, the perfume is mist, and the people inside drift as if floating on a river designed to lull both emperor and empire into compliance. The court believed. In this believed that fabric and fragrance-shaped mood stirred desire, even aligned the body with cosmic harmony. Imagine a physician advising that the emperor wear lighter silks in spring, thicker weaves in autumn, to match the flow of yin and yang. You can almost see the poor man writing it down with a straight face, while knowing full well that most of this advice was just an excuse to commission more robes. And robes, of course, were never just robes. They were declarations. Gold-threaded dragons, phoenix wings fanning across sleeves, subtle colors announcing rank before a word was spoken. But beneath the grandeur, you hear the small, unpolished truths, the silk snagged on a wooden screen, the perfumed oil spilling too heavily so that what was meant to be alluring now smells like someone drowned in a spice market. The emperor coughs, waves his hand, and everyone pretends the moment is still divine. This is the comedy stitched into power, the little stumbles that never make it into official chronicles. But you know they happened, and sometimes the fabrics themselves told stories nobody intended. Silk imported through vast trade networks carried with it not only sheen but rumor, which regions had the finest weave, which dyes were hardest to fix, which shades were thought too unlucky to wear in bed. To wear a robe dyed with safflower red was to summon passion. To wear pale green was to signal renewal. Did the emperor truly believe the colors affected his fortune, or was it simply another layer of theater? Even now, scholars pore over scraps of cloth, puzzled over whether these associations were heartfelt beliefs or convenient embellishments. In truth, the line blurs, as it always does. The women, too, mastered this fabric language. A concubine adjusting her sleeve just so might reveal the glimmer of embroidery meant only for the emperor's eye, or let the perfume from her wrist curl gently toward him. Clothing became strategy, every fold a possible advantage. The irony, of course, is that while silk was prized for its smoothness, court life was anything but smooth. Beneath the silk were ambitions sharp enough to cut, yet here in the candlelight, it all feels softer. You let your gaze rest on the fall of a robe, the way the shadows trace the edge of a sleeve. How perfume lingers just long enough to catch. In your breath, the fabrics flutter, the air thickens, and once again the empire dreams that beauty itself can hold chaos at bay. For a moment, it almost seems true. And so you drift deeper, carried not by words on parchment, but by the rustle of silk and the sigh of scent. The chamber closes around you, warm and fragrant. And you realize that sometimes the greatest secrets are not hidden in scrolls or forbidden techniques, but in the ordinary touch of fabric against skin, the way a simple thread can bind power, intimacy, and illusion into one quiet weave. The silks slip into stillness, the perfumes thin into air, and you feel another kind of presence entering the chamber. Not a consort this time, not a rival draped in embroidery, but the quiet shuffle of a physician, sleeves plain, face composed in that strained mixture of reverence and exhaustion. He bows low, careful not to let his cap tilt, then waits to be waved closer, his hands clutching a scroll that seems far too heavy for a few layers of paper. The room has changed. What was a stage of rustling fabrics now becomes a theater of diagnosis. The emperor reclines, as emperors do, and the physician kneels at his side, fingertips hovering like dragonflies over a wrist. Pulse reading such a delicate art, and one that was said to reveal not just health, but the balance of yin and yang, the tides of energy that supposedly shaped not only the body but desire itself. Imagine, then, the gravity of it. The empire's future whispered in a pulse that might feel too fast simply because the emperor had an extra cup of wine the night before. The physician clears his throat, mutters something about stagnant qi or overheated yang, and immediately the chamber leans in. Diagnosis was never just about health. It was prophecy disguised as medicine. You can almost hear the anxious scribes outside the door, sharpening their brushes in case this moment requires a record. His Majesty's energy shall flourish, or, more ominously, His Majesty should refrain. And so the scrolls arrive. Great unwinding sheets filled with characters, their ink brushed so carefully they still seem to breathe centuries later. They contain recipes, some absurd, some ingenious blending herbs, minerals, and the occasional animal part into elixirs, promising vigor. Tiger bone, deer antler, ginseng root, pearl dust, even substances that no sane man today would ever swallow, which prescribed with solemnity. And yet behind the solemn faces you can sense the flicker of nerves. Was this truly medicine, or was it theatre to keep a ruler reassured? Historians still debate whether these elaborate prescriptions genuinely shaped imperial practice, or whether they served mostly as ceremony, a way of wrapping uncertainty in layers of authority. But the scrolls did more than soothe. They codified entire philosophies of intimacy, how balance should be maintained, how indulgence might weaken the body, how restraint could strengthen the spirit. A whole vocabulary of yin and yang turned into a moral compass, whispering that desire was not simply desire, but the echo of heaven and earth. A single embrace might be reimagined as cosmic alignment or, if mistimed, cosmic disaster. You almost want to laugh at the seriousness with which they recorded these things. But then you realize this was how empires explained what could not be controlled. Picture the physician's ink-stained fingers as he copies lines late into the night, advising the emperor on seasonal rhythms of intimacy. Spring was for renewal, summer for vitality, autumn for moderation, winter for conservation. And of course, behind such advice lurked the most practical concern of all: succession. Every embrace was tied to lineage, every prescription haunted by the question of heirs. Perhaps the silks whispered of beauty, but the scrolls whispered of dynasty, and both were equally binding. Yet even in this serious world of diagnosis and doctrine, comedy found a way to sneak in. Imagine the emperor choking down some foul concoction of boiled herbs and ground shell, only to grimace and spit half of it into the sleeve of his robe, while the physician pretends not to notice. Imagine a concubine dutifully burning a packet of medicinal incense in her chamber, only for the smoke to be so thick it makes everyone cough like apprentices in a dusty archive. These moments didn't make it into official histories, of course, but the human body rarely cooperates with dignity. Still, the faith persisted. The scrolls multiplied, copied and recopied, until their words stretched far beyond one palace. Manuals of intimacy and medicine blended into folklore, guiding not only emperors but ordinary couples who believed that balance and harmony could be read in the beat of a heart or the choice of an herb. The private life of a ruler seeped outward, teaching a population how to think about desire itself as something that could be measured, adjusted, cured, even perfected. You lean closer, watching the ink flicker in the lamplight. The physician bows again, retreating with the same shuffling steps, leaving behind the smell of ink and dried herbs. The silks still hang on the screens, the perfumes still linger, but now the room feels different. It carries the weight of words, of advice pressed into parchment, of centuries humming through a single scroll. And you sense that for the emperor, intimacy was never simply personal, it was medical, political, even cosmological. A private act, yes, but one mapped out by doctors and bound into texts that claimed to know the secrets of heaven. The chamber quiets, as if waiting for another turn of the page, another prescription, another night where the pulse of one man's body could determine the direction of a dynasty. And in that stillness, you drift further, lulled by the rustle of silk and the whisper of scrolls, as though history itself has decided to sing you to sleep. The scroll is rolled tight again, tucked back into its lacquered case, and the physician bows himself into the shadows. For a moment, you think the chamber is empty, breathing only silk and silence. But of course, it never truly is. Behind the screens, beyond the carved doors, and in the corners where lantern light fades, there are always ears. Servants with lowered heads, eunuchs with downcast eyes, guards pretending to stare straight ahead. They hear everything, every cough, every sigh, every shuffle of embroidered slippers across polished stone. And once heard, these sounds never stay locked in the room. They slip like smoke beyond the walls. You might imagine the emperor as the most private man in the realm, but in truth his privacy was the most fragile. His bed was never entirely his own. The silks that hid his rest also framed a stage, and the audience, though invisible, was endless. Gossip was not just idle chatter. Here, it was currency. A whisper about the emperor's favored concubine could ripple through the palace faster than a royal edict, carried on the lips of kitchen boys and laundry maids, until it reached ministers who weighed the rumor as if it were strategy. The eunuchs were masters of this hidden economy. They hovered at doors, fetched water, adjusted lamps, always near enough to gather fragments of words. And because they had no families of their own, their loyalties flowed like rivers that could be redirected with enough gold or promise. Some eunuchs became powerful precisely because they controlled access, not just to the emperor's chamber, but to the emperor's reputation. What was said, or what might have been said, could shape the careers of generals, the fortunes of clans, even the mood of the throne itself. And then there were the spies, not the kind slipping through dark alleys in cloaks, but those who blended seamlessly into palace life. A maid delivering scented oil might also deliver news. A musician strumming in the courtyard might pluck secrets between strings. Even a gardener trimming chrysanthemums could overhear which pavilion had been lit with lanterns late into the night. Historians still debate just how organized these networks of listening truly were, whether emperors consciously cultivated them or whether gossip simply thrived on its own, like ivy creeping up a wall. Either way, the effect was the same. Intimacy turned porous, personal life seeping into public consequence, and oh, the comedy of it. Imagine the emperor whispering a tender word to one concubine, thinking himself utterly private, only to hear it echoed the next day in a distorted version among the kitchen staff, where it became less romance and more punchline. Or picture a servant caught mid-giggle as she repeats what she overheard, hastily pretending she was only coughing. The palace may have been marble and jade, but within it beat a very human heart that found endless amusement in bending the solemn into the ridiculous. The servants themselves lived in a paradox. They were invisible and yet omnipresent, sworn to silence but relied upon for the very whispers their silence concealed. A handmaiden adjusting a robe might know more about secession politics than a minister at court. A cook stirring soup might understand alliances better than generals planning campaigns. Information dripped constantly through the smallest cracks, and those who carried it became both the lowest and the most dangerous figures in the empire. But perhaps the most curious part is how the emperor himself sometimes leaned on these whispers. For all the grandeur of court memorials and official decrees, there was knowledge that could only be found in gossip. Who was conspiring? Who was jealous? Who was falling from favor? These things were rarely announced formally. They were tested in the way voices hushed when a name was spoken, or how quickly a rumor spread when a concubine's lantern stayed lit too long at night. In a strange reversal, the emperor often had to listen not just with authority but with suspicion, piecing together truth from fragments carried by servants and spies. And so the walls of the chamber became something more than boundaries. They were membranes, porous and alive, absorbing secrets, exhaling rumors. To be inside them was to be watched and interpreted, to have every gesture magnified. Even silence became suspicious. A night with no laughter, no music, no rustle of silk that too could fuel speculation. The absence of sound often told louder stories than words. As you sink into this atmosphere, you might feel the irony pressing down. The emperor, master of all under heaven, could command armies and topple kingdoms, yet could not command his own privacy. His most intimate choices echoed outward like ripples in a pond, distorted by each ear that heard them. Power was absolute in theory, But in practice it depended on those quiet figures slipping in and out of rooms, carrying trays, lighting candles, bowing just low enough to catch everything. There is a softness to this realization, almost lulling, because beneath the danger and intrigue, these whispers made the palace oddly human. They stitched together lives otherwise kept apart by status and hierarchy. A concubine's sigh might become the subject of a maid's joke. A physician's warning might turn into a guard's bedtime story. The empire itself was woven from these murmurs, fragile and persistent, like threads running through silk that no one could see but everyone could feel. And so the chamber exhales again, silks swaying gently, as though the walls themselves are listening still. The emperor may rest, but the empire never truly sleeps. It hums in whispers, 1,000 voices just beyond the doors, waiting to reshape what was private into something public, something political, something eternal. And you, drifting in this chorus of murmurs, feel the hush pulling you deeper, as if the walls have decided to cradle you too, carrying you softly into the next dream of history. The walls have been whispering long enough that you almost forget what silence feels like. Yet the palace does not rest on rumors alone. It breathes in rhythm with drums, incense, and ritual. In the emperor's world, intimacy was never just flesh and feeling. It was bound up with spirits, omens, and the steady gaze of ancestors who, inconveniently, never seemed to look away. Imagine trying to be romantic while your great-grandfather's tablet stares from the family shrine. Nothing says set the mood like the eyes of the dead. Watching from polished wood, candles and lamps were never chosen at random. Their number, their placement, their directional carried meaning. A flame facing south might invite prosperity. A flame that sputtered at the wrong moment could be read as an omen of discord. If the emperor sneezed mid-embrace, a priest might declare the gods themselves had issued a warning. You think allergies are awkward in spring? Try explaining to your astrologer that it wasn't divine disapproval, just too much incense smoke in a closed room. Religion was both a comfort and a burden. Taoist alchemists prescribed elixirs and breathing techniques, convinced they could channel cosmic harmony straight into the bedroom. Some of their advice sounds suspiciously like a wellness influencer's blog. Control your breath, balance your energies, live forever. Others were less appealing. Powders made from odd minerals, tonics brewed with ingredients best left unnamed. The emperor was expected not just to satisfy his household, but to align with the cosmos itself. Imagine the pressure. A disappointed partner was one thing, but a disappointed universe was quite another. Ceremonies often wrapped around these moments like elaborate costumes. Timing had to align with auspicious days, guided by the lunar calendar. Some emperors delayed entire evenings because the stars did not cooperate. You picture him pacing in embroidered slippers while an astrologer outside checks the sky and announces, "Not tonight, Your Majesty the moon disapproves." Nothing kills spontaneity faster than celestial scheduling. But superstition also gave reassurance. A dream of a dragon could mean strength. A dream of broken combs could mean betrayal. Concubines clung to charms stitched into pillows, jade pendants, pressed against their chests, tiny talismans hidden in hairpins. If love failed, perhaps luck would intervene. Servants, ever practical, kept track of which rituals seemed to win favor, adjusting their advice with a sly smile. A bowl of peaches, left untouched, might carry more weight than 1,000 whispered promises. What fascinates you most, though, is how these beliefs blurred the line between private and public. A night in the chamber became a political act disguised as a spiritual one. If the emperor chose a consort on a festival day tied to fertility, ministers took note. If a favored concubine performed a ritual for longevity and bore a son soon after, it was seen not just as biology but as cosmic endorsement. Historians still puzzle over where faith ended and strategy began. Perhaps, in truth, they were never separate, and it wasn't all solemn. Palace life had a way of twisting even heavy rituals into moments of quiet comedy. Picture the emperor nervously reciting chants, only to forget the words halfway through, earning a barely muffled laugh from a handmaiden. Or imagine a priest insisting on absolute stillness during a blessing while a cat wanders in, tail flicking. Incense sticks across the floor. The divine and the ridiculous often shared the same stage, proving once again that humanity always sneaks through ceremony's cracks. As the night deepens in your imagination, the room grows heavy with incense. The smoke curls like slow rivers, carrying prayers upward, whether to gods or just to the rafters, no one can be sure. Outside, the drums of ritual fade, but their echo lingers in your chest, steady, calming. You feel yourself sinking with it, lulled by the strange blend of superstition and tenderness, belief and desire. In the palace, even intimacy had to wear the mask of ritual, yet beneath the mask the same fragile hope throbbed that someone, human or divine, was listening, and that love, however staged, might still be real. The rituals have barely faded when you realize how quickly the fragrance of incense can be replaced by the far heavier scent of politics. In the Imperial palace, intimacy was never just. Intimacy was dynastic insurance, the kind that carried the weight of centuries. Imagine trying to whisper sweet nothings while knowing the stability of an empire hinges on what happens in your bed. That's not exactly the kind of pillow talk you want, unless you enjoy phrases like, "for the sake of the dynasty," muttered in the dark. Every choice the emperor made who to call into his chambers, when, and why reverberated through the labyrinth of court politics. A single evening's affection could lift one clan to power or send another sliding into disgrace. The empress herself often acted as gatekeeper, her favor determining which concubines rose or fell. And if you think modern in-laws are a headache, imagine yours holding the imperial seal and an army of eunuchs ready to enforce her preferences. Love, if it existed, had to weave itself between walls of duty. The emperor was expected to father sons, many sons, because each one was both a blessing and a potential insurance policy against disaster. Yet to many sons bred rivalry, suspicion, and endless plotting. Picture a royal nursery where toddlers already represent political factions, their caretakers whispering strategies as if planning toddler-sized coups. It sounds absurd, but dynastic survival often depended on which child managed to outlast his brothers. Concubines, of course, played the game with a mix of grace and cunning. One might sing softly, another write poetry, another offer the comfort of laughter when the emperor's brow furrowed under state affairs. These were not just romantic gestures, they were auditions for influence. A well-placed smile at the right moment could sway the course of succession more than 1,000 ministerial memos. History records more than one dynasty shaken not by invading armies but by the quiet power of a favored woman's hand on the emperor's sleeve. And yet, amid the strategies and alliances, real emotion sometimes slipped through, inconvenient and messy. An emperor might genuinely adore one consort, to the irritation of his advisors, who preferred him to spread his affections like state investments. You can almost hear the counselors arguing, Your Majesty, diversification of assets is critical for imperial stability, but passion does not always listen to political theory, and hearts, even inside golden palaces, rarely follow orderly charts. One story often told is of an emperor so smitten that he delayed court meetings just to linger with his beloved. Ministers complained, records scolded him, but for a moment humanity triumphed over duty. The empire survived, though his reputation did not. It's oddly comforting to know even emperors could be guilty of hitting snooze on the responsibilities of an empire for the sake of staying in bed. The collision of dynasty and desire was rarely quiet. Families of concubines jostled for influence, offering bribes or favors, scheming to secure a grandson as heir. Eunuchs, ever observant, carried secrets like fragile parcels, trading information in whispers that could make or unmake futures. The palace thrummed with a constant undercurrent of calculation, every embrace measured not only by affection but by its potential ripple across the empire. Still, beneath the calculation, there lingered a deep truth. Humans crave connection, even when wrapped in silk and protocol. The emperor, cloaked in endless ceremony, sought moments of laughter, tenderness, or the simple relief of being seen not as ruler but as man. Concubines, too, reached for fragments of affection amid the relentless chessboard of survival. These flashes of honesty shone all the brighter against a cold backdrop of politics, reminding you that desire is stubborn, refusing to be boxed neatly into strategy. Historians argue endlessly over how much genuine love shaped dynasties. Some say it was all politics, a machine where hearts were cogs. Others insist that, from time to time, emotion bent the machine's gears. Perhaps the truth lies in the middle, that the empire endured not despite love, but because even emperors, with all their power, could not escape the pull of human longing. The idea that one blush, one laugh, one shared moment could ripple outward to alter the fate of millions is both absurd and profoundly human. As the story hums on in your ears, you feel the irony settle over you like a soft blanket. The greatest empires were sometimes nudged by the smallest gestures in candlelit rooms. Desire tangled with duty, laughter with strategy, whispers with the roar of history. And while the empire might demand sons and heirs, the people inside those walls still reached for something far older, far more stubborn than politics. Need to be wanted, not as dynasty, not as symbol, but simply as themselves. The candles in your imagination flicker lower now, their smoke curling like threads of stories unfinished. Outside the courtyard stones are cooling, and the night air settles heavy with the mingled sense of power and longing. You breathe slower, the echoes of palace intrigues turning soft, almost tender, as though the empire itself is sighing with you. And you can't help but think, if even emperors struggled to balance heart and duty, maybe it's okay that you sometimes hit snooze on your own responsibilities too. You breathe slowly, as though the palace itself has taught you to inhale history and exhale silence. The air tonight is hushed, but it carries more than incense, it carries memory. A kind of faint perfume of lives that slipped past long before yours. You are still inside those chambers, though the walls have changed names and dynasties, though emperors have turned to dust. What lingers is not the echo of their voices, but of their choices, stitched into silk, scribbled into scrolls, whispered behind doors, and carried in the hush of servant sandals down long corridors. The bedchambers of the court were not simply about rest or even pleasure, they were theatres where dynasties rehearsed their survival. Think of the empress who smiled sweetly while arranging which concubine would be sent to the emperor's chambers that night. Her expression seemed serene, but every gesture was a calculation. If one woman was favored too often, the balance tilted. If another was neglected, her clan might complain. Even intimacy was a matter of statecraft. And you, standing at the edge of this memory, see how the smallest of sighs could ripple through an empire. The silk sheets, soft under the lamplight, were more than fabric. They were silent witnesses, holding the impressions of bodies long vanished. The scents of perfumed oils, of sandalwood, of musk, were designed to linger not just on the skin but in memory, so that one emperor might associate loyalty or betrayal with a fragrance. Strange, isn't it? That something as invisible as a smell could influence who carried the future in her womb. And yes, while the ministers in their robes argued in marble halls, the true decisions of succession might be shaped by who had brushed their hair with rose oil that evening. You hear the faint sound of laughter from behind a screen, though it belongs to no one living. Perhaps it is the echo of a concubine teasing an emperor, daring just enough to amuse him but not enough to offend. Or perhaps it is the nervous laugh of a eunuch trying to disguise the fact that he has overheard more than he should. Gossip, superstition, medicine, silk saul, these strands have wound themselves into one rope, pulling dynasties forward and sometimes strangling them in the process. Historians still debate whether these inner chambers truly shaped the fate of kingdoms, or if the stories we tell now exaggerate the influence of love and desire. But when you listen closely, lying here as if the palace itself cradles you, the echoes suggest that private life and public destiny were never separate. A misplaced glance, a rumor whispered into the wrong ear, a physician's bold suggestion. In a scroll, such small details could topple or fortify a throne. And while debates rage in scholarly halls, the palace whispers remain soft, steady, persuasive. Let your eyes wander across the faded murals, the painted clouds and dragons curling across ceilings. Their colors are faint, but they were once bold enough to dazzle in candlelight. Those dragons have watched countless rulers close their eyes. At night, each one believing he held eternity in his grasp. And yet, eternity belonged not to them, but to the patterns left behind, the rituals of the bedroom, the alliances woven in perfumed shadows, the silences heavy with meaning. You might smile at the thought that while emperors commanded armies, they were often undone by their own bedsheets. Too many nights of indulgence could leave them weak. Too many whispered promises could ignite jealousies. You can almost hear a concubine thinking, yes, go ahead and conquer the north. But remember who holds your attention tonight. It is a reminder that history is not only written by generals, but also embroidered by hands you will never know by name. And so these echoes reach you. They come not as thunder, but as the faint scrape of silk slippers on polished stone, as the sigh of incense smoke curling into rafters, as the hush of voices lowered behind lattice screens. They reach you as a lullaby, steady and slow, inviting you to rest in the knowledge that lives have always been shaped by both power and tenderness, by both duty and desire. The palace fades as you breathe, not because it is gone, but because its memory has learned how to lie down beside you. What you inherit from these rooms is not scandal or spectacle, but rhythm. The rhythm of lives lived in secret, the rhythm of longing restrained by ceremony, the rhythm of voices that still whisper, even now, into your ear. And as your eyes close, you let that rhythm carry you soft, slow, timeless into sleep.